Next, we're going to talk about brambles. Brambles are your blackberries, your raspberries, and your wineberries that we're going to be talking about. There's a lot of different species of that and subspecies. So let's just get the high point on these and talk about the blackberry, which is a native one, American red raspberry, which is also native, and so is the black raspberry. We'll also be talking about wineberry, which is non-native and is becoming invasive. But all of these are edible and they're going to be used in a lot of similar ways. We'll talk about those. First up, we have blackberries. These are extremely delicious plants, and you can see them growing here with the flowers. All of these plants, they're in the rose family, so you're going to see a lot of similarities to the flowers, to the wild rose. And as we see here, and we're going to talk about the difference on how to tell the blackberries apart from the black raspberries, not just whenever they're fruiting, but also before they're fruiting. So if you're going to use them for medicinal uses, or if you're going to use them to eat the greens, or if you just want to know the difference so you can feel confident in your identification, which is very, very important. This is just some more pictures of the blackberries. We have the fruits on the left-hand side, and then we have a first-year growth of the leaves. These are perennials, so they are going to come back year to year. And what we have is the leaves. This is a time when you would want to eat them if you were going to put them in your salad. You can also eat the shoots as well. You want to eat them when they're young and tender in the early spring. Don't eat them later because it actually has chemical compounds that actually are slightly toxic that develop in the leaves, but they're completely safe to consume in the early spring when they're fresh and young. And as you can look on the right hand side, the blackberries will produce a large quantity of edible foods. And these fruits can be picked and cleaned, and then you can freeze them for later use. And you can keep them in the freezer for approximately a year. Try to use them up, though, within the year before the next season for peak freshness. This is the black raspberry. As you can see, there's a lot of similarities to the flower, but this is a little, in my opinion, a more dainty plant. On the underside of the leaves that you're not going to see in the blackberries is going to have a white underside, whereas if you turn the blackberry leaf upside down, you're not going to see that. It's just going to be a lighter shade of green, but green nonetheless. And as you can see with the raspberries, we have a more spherical fruit rather than the blackberry rather, where it's a little more elongated. Just a little ways to tell the difference. Of course, they're all safe to eat. Just some, depending on your recipe, maybe you would prefer to have the black raspberry over the blackberry. This is the root before, or the black raspberries. You see the fruit that's still on it is actually unripe fruit. It's not ready to be picked. And what you have is whenever you do take it off, you can see that when you pick this fruit, it does leave that like a thing where it's going to leave a divot in the fruit. I know there's a much more eloquent way of describing that, but right now that does escape me. This is the wineberry. It's very similar, and as we discussed, this one is non-native. A difference between this that you can tell is it's going to have red hairs all up and down it, and these red hairs are going to be up even around the berries as they're forming and the flowers. It's completely edible. It's completely delicious. I like this a lot better in some cases. As far as just eating raw, I would prefer this one over the other ones. This is going to have the white underside of the leaf, as we will see with the black raspberry. And the difference, of course, we can tell with the hairs that are all up and down, the canes and the stems, and as you can see here, that do surround the flower buds and the fruit as it's developing. Just some additional pictures. As you can see, whenever the fruit is a yellow or an orange salmon color, it is not ready to be consumed. You do want it to get to a nice deep reddish color. This is to show the difference between the canes. So if you're trying to identify this plant without looking at the leaves, without looking at the flowers, and without looking at the berries, this is how it can be done. The blackberry is going to have very long thorns, and more so than you're going to see like with the wineberry or even the black raspberry. And you're going to see those hook thorns, which are typical of, plants in the rose family or like wild roses. But anyway, the cane is just going to be kind of a brownish magenta burgundy color with no coating. The black raspberry is going to have a whitish coating over top of it, and you can rub that off, and then you're going to see it has a similar color cane to the blackberry. And the wineberry is very easy. It has those hairs all up and down it, and those hairs are going to persist all year round. This is just showing you the differences between these plants and whenever they're in the fruiting season. One thing to note in strict botanical terms, this is actually what's known as an aggregate fruit, and it's because it's not a berry. Each one of these little drupelets, as you can see, they're considered an independent individual fruit, and it's an aggregate fruit because they all combine together. That's just, something to be aware of if you're interested in that. How we can eat these. You can make the fruit. June through September is typically when you're going to find them. Blackberries are later than the wineberries and the black raspberries. And you can eat them raw, of course. You can make them into jelly, put them in teas, cold drinks. You can eat the young shoots, especially with the blackberries. Very nice in the spring to add to your salads. Juice, blend them. The leaves of any of them you can have in the late spring to early summer. You want the fresh green leaves, the new growth. Don't get the old leaves that are darker. And you can also use these in tea and add them to salad. If you're going to do it as a tea, consider that an infusion, because you don't want to be boiling this for a long period of time. I would just gently boil the water, take it off for a few minutes, let it cool down to approximately 180 degrees, then pour the water over and then cover and steep for however long you would like, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. The flowers you can eat, you can add them to your salad, and the flowers are going to, depending on where you're located, April through June. Medicinal uses. The leaves are very astringent, and this is going to be very helpful in treating diarrhea. And it's been used historically to treat dysentery. It's helpful for stomach pain. And raspberry leaf tea is especially helpful for alleviating menstrual cramps, and it's been used to strengthen for pregnant women, and it helps in childbirth. What it does is it tones the uterus, though there's a lot of debate on whether there's enough evidence to support that. There's just some suggestion, and it has been used for that in the past. You can also have a nice tea, and it'll help soothe mild sore throats. The roots you can either have as a tea, in that case it would be more of a decoction, because you would want to boil those. They're not going to get all the medicinal benefits out in just an infusion for a short period of time. Or you can do an alcohol-based tincture. You can use this as a blood tonic for boils, and it helps purify the system. And it is astringent, just like the leaves are as well. You can make a wash of the leaves, and that's just taking the leaves and breaking them up and soaking them in water. And you can take a clean towel and dip that in there, and then place that on sores, ulcers, boils, and that will help with the healing process. Next up is garlic mustard. This is one of my favorite wild edibles, and this one you do not have to restrict yourself in how much you consume, except for your own personal keeping things in moderation. But as far as environmentally, you're not doing your environment a disservice by actually taking all of this. It's very invasive, and this does need to be eradicated from the area. And what a better way to do it than to actually use this for medicinal or edible purposes. This plant is in the mustard family. That family is a family that has broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, a lot of plants in which we're familiar. And it's also known as the crucifers, and that's because the flowers typically are going to have 4 petals and be in a cross shape, and hence the name. This is a biennial, and in the first year is not the time that you want to be picking leaves. You actually do want to wait until the second year, preferably before it goes to seeds, because you really do want to get it out of the environment so it doesn't keep on spreading. So the first year, you're going to see some differences in the leaves. It's just good to know to identify it then, because then you'll know you can come back early spring and get some good greens for putting on sandwiches or in your salads or making a nice steamed green. So what's interesting in the first year is the leaves are actually more rounded, more kidney shaped, if you will. And in the second year, as it bolts up into its stalk, the single stalk where it will be flowering, the leaves actually become much more triangular, and it's very, very noticeable. Also, another way to identify this plant is actually to crush the leaves. They are going to smell of garlic, and they are going to have a garlicky taste as well. which is rather interesting because garlic is not in this family. What you need to know is in the second year is when you're going to find it flowering, and that's going to be March to June. This one is typically gone completely by June, especially in areas like Washington, D.C. And the best time to get it would be really probably about now, April into May. You're getting a little bit late in the season, depending where you are. But just think about it as early spring. Get out there and find this one, and we'll talk about some of the ways you can use it. And when you do find it, you see the first year it is taking over. And there's a compound that this plant produces that actually gets into the soil and actually doesn't allow, like a lot of the native plants, to proliferate there. So it does have a very strong ability to crowd out a lot of the native plants, which is why this does need to be removed whenever you find that. And in the second year, as you see, it is growing over here, and it's pretty. It'll grow a lot of different places. It does like the sun, but it will tolerate some shade as well. Edible uses. You can eat every part of this plant from the root to the seeds. So you can have the leaves, stems, flowers. They make a great addition to your salad, sandwiches, steamed, sauteed, juiced, blended in your smoothies. Mind you, they're going to have a very strong taste, though, more so than maybe some of your other leafy greens. The leaves can be used in lieu of parsley to make a delicious pesto. The roots can be grated or sliced like horseradish. Of course, the roots aren't going to be as big as the typical, commercial horseradish, but sometimes you got to take what you can get. And also, the roots would be best if you could get them before it flowers, so you'd want to get them after the first hard frost or early in the spring before the plant actually does bolt up. You're going to lose a lot of the taste, and you're also going to get something that's a much more tougher thing to be dealing with. So it holds true for all the biennials. You want to get the root after the first hard frost and before it bolts up in the spring. The seeds, you can use them to flavor food just like the cultivated mustard plant. Medicinally, you can use this as a disinfectant, and it does act as a diuretic. Again, a note on this plant. It is goitrogenic, like many of the plants, if not all of them, that are in the crucifer family, like that are known as crucifers. And they will disrupt your thyroid function. They do interfere with your iodine uptake. Iodine is absolutely necessary for proper thyroid function. And one way you can reduce this is, one, eat a very diverse kind of diet. And if you're eating a lot of garlic mustard in the spring, maybe you don't want to be eating a lot of the other crucifers. I mean, they're not even in season anyway. So, you'd have to be getting them, from some other part of the country. And you could also steam them. That's going to help mitigate that effect. Or you can eat them with seaweed. And seaweed's very high in iodine, so that will help mitigate that as well. It's best to consume the leaves early in the second year if eating raw. Very important, because plants do contain compounds that protect them from the environment, that help them survive. In this case, it needs to survive the winter. And it also needs to ward off predators, bugs, and things from eating it. So it does have compounds in it that discourage predators and animals from eating it. And those are not exactly the best things that we want to be eating them. So we want to eat once those have actually minimized. It doesn't need to be producing those chemicals in the second year. Once it gets to where it's at the point of flowering, it's like, hey, we've made it and it's good to go. It doesn't really mind if the leaves are being eaten at that point, because it's already got all the energy up into the flowers and they will be going to seed. Next up is another invasive plant. It's known as Japanese knotweed. And you'll find this flowering from May to September, but this is not the time that you want to get it whenever it's flowering. You want to get this when this is a young shoot or whenever you're just eating the young leaves. And this plant is extremely invasive. Please eat this. Please get this out of the environment. It takes over. It's also known as Mexican bamboo. It is not the bamboo, which is also an invasive problem around the area as well, but that is what it's called, or American bamboo. As you can see, this is in the smartweed buckwheat family, and that's also known as the knotweed family. How you can tell this plant apart: one, you're going to see it has a zigzag to whenever it grows on the stem. That's a good way to tell the difference of this plant. But another key way is if you actually cut and again, we do want to know our plants before we just start cutting them and checking what they are. But in this case, if you're 99% sure of what it is, the way to make the final check is if you caught one of the stems, it's going to be hollow, except for at the knots, at the joints, it's going to be solid. So in between the knots, it's going to be hollow at the stems, and at the knots, it's going to be solid. And you'll see it growing year to year to year to year, and it will keep coming back. These leaves here, when they're fresh and green and shiny like this, are very delicious to eat. They have a kind of a tart taste to them. I very much enjoy them. Also, the pollen and the nectar is collected by bees and used for honey, and it makes a very delicious honey. You can use the shoots, and this is actually the best thing to get, is especially when they're red like that, because it's going to have a lot of what is known as resveratrol in it. And the shoots, whenever they get to be older like this on this plate with these muffins that I made, you're going to actually have to peel them. They're a little tough and fibrous, and use a little bit more of the delicate inner parts of that. If you do get them when they're young, like they are on the left-hand side, you're not going to have to do any peeling. You can actually just chop them up, cook them, just like you would rhubarb if you were making a rhubarb pie. And you can use this in lieu of rhubarb, make a strawberry Japanese knotweed pie, or in these muffins, or kind of cook them up like asparagus. They are going to be tart, though, like rhubarb, and not tasting like asparagus. Regardless of which, the tender young shoots up to a foot is the best. The shorter the better. You're going to get a much more tender and delicious experience. You can eat them raw, you can juice them, blend them, saute them, or steam them like asparagus. The tender young leaves, you can have them in a salad green, or as above, like as I would describe, just eating them, raw or juicing them, or you can just eat them as a trailside nibble. The stems, you can simmer them in soups or use in making sauce and jams. They'll have to be cooked down if they get to be a little more on the tougher side. The seeds, you can grind these into a flour-like substance, more as a flour extender. And you can add that ground up seeds to soups and stews for extra nutrition and flavor, as well as to serve as a thickening agent. The rhizomes, which we're going to talk about, especially for the medicinal uses, but you can actually consume those as a root vegetable. You can cook them just like you would beets or carrots or anything, turnips. Medicinal uses, it's an excellent source of vitamin C and resveratrol. Resveratrol is a very potent anti-parasitic agent. Resveratrol is also claimed to be anti-cancer, and it's also touted to help with diabetes and serve as a possible anti-aging compound. Now, keep those things in mind that some of the claims haven't been evaluated by the FDA, and, do a little bit more research on that. But it is resveratrol, that's in the grape skins, that is what is supposed to give grapes and wines their, anti-aging benefits. So you do have some evidence from that angle. Also, resveratrol is a supplement that you can purchase, and most of the resveratrol in the stores is actually derived from Japanese knotweed because it does grow so easily, and it is has one of the most highest concentrations of it, if not the highest. In traditional Chinese medicine known as TCM, and traditional Japanese medicine known as TJM, it's used to treat fungal and bacterial infections, various skin inflammations, and cardiovascular disease. The root, the rhizome, is being researched right now as a potential treatment for Lyme disease. Next up, we have Jerusalem artichoke. This is a native plant. It's known as sunroot or sunchokes. You may see this in a health food store. It's very common. This plant is in the Asteraceae family, which is the same family with dandelions and burdock. And that's also known as the aster, daisy, or sunflower family. So what we have here, it's a beautiful plant. It's going to flower usually July through September. It's going to be extremely tall. It's not uncommon to see 167 feet tall, but we don't have to be worrying about that per se, because we're really going to want to be harvesting the tubers. And it is going to keep coming back year after year. It is a perennial. And what's interesting about this plant is one of the ways to identify it is touch the leaves. They're very sandpapery. They're very rough. And also, you can just make sure that you're learning the flowers and the way that it grows. And typically, the leaves are going to be opposite, closer to the ground, and then become alternate as they go up. Though that doesn't always hold completely true. And we want to note that there's a look-alike, and it's called wingstem, and it's also known as yellow ironweed. The reason this plant is called wingstem is because if you look at the stems, it's going to have little flaps on the side that look like wings. That's very good to know because that's a telltale way to tell these apart. Another way is typically when you'll find this plant, it looks like half the flower petals are gone. And as far as I can tell, this is just the way that it grows. It's just very erratic. I don't think anybody, keeps coming through and just picking off the random petals off this plant. And I've never seen evidence that half of them are falling off. It's just that it grows in a very sporadic way. As far as I can tell, I've never found any evidence that this plant has any edible or medicinal uses, historically or in current practice. If anybody knows of any, please write it in the comments. I would really appreciate it. So, as stated, the tubers, you can eat them raw, you can cook them. They can be substituted for potatoes, carrots, turnips, any of the other root vegetables. The thin skin can be left on or removed. It's better nutrition, of course, if you're going to leave the skin on. You can slice these thinly. You can eat raw. They're going to provide a really nice crunch. They have a lot of water content and a really nice flavor. The raw tubers will discolor if you cut them and peel them and you leave them exposed to air just through the oxidation process. But this does not affect the edibility. Potatoes are going to do that too as well. But you can mitigate that by actually putting them in cold water and storing them in the refrigerator until you're ready to use them. And this plant, like I said, 6 to 10 feet, very common to see. 10's a little bit on the high side. It's more often to see 6 or 7 feet. Medicinally, you can make a tea from the leaves and stalks. You'd want to go more with an infusion, as well as consuming the flowers. That's been used historically by different tribes of Native Americans to treat rheumatism. The tubers store their carbohydrates as inulin. It's a type of soluble fiber that serves as a prebiotic for probiotics. You'll find this carbohydrate in burdock root, chicory root, and those are two main sources. Even if you look at some of your foods that you're buying at the grocery store, you'll see that it has actually added chicory root fiber to it, and especially if it's making claims about how it's high in fiber or is serving as a prebiotic for your probiotics. So you can go get this for free. You can get it from chicory for free as well because that plant grows throughout the region as well. And inulin does help with blood sugar management and treating diabetes. Of course, a word of warning with someone, if you are on medication to manage your diabetes, be careful with introducing too many foods that have a high inulin content because it could actually throw your sugar out of balance by providing too much management. So please speak with your healthcare provider. Next up, we have lamb's quarter. Lamb's quarter is also known as goosefoot or wild spinach. It's also called pigweed and fat hen. We'll explain why all of those. Spinach is very closely related to. That's an easy one. Goosefoot, it's because the leaves are said to look like the foot of a goose. And pigweed and fat hen is because pigs like to eat it, and so do hens. It's actually very good foraging food for those animals. This is a plant that is an annual. It could be native or not. There's a lot of argument among, as far as I can tell. I can't get a solid answer. If someone knows more, I don't come from a botany background. I come from a mathematics and a different background. So if anyone knows more, please, I would love to know. And you're going to find this growing around. It's very easy to identify once you take a look at some of the features. One, the leaves are going to look like little geese feet? Goosefoot? Anyway, it's going to be white on the underside, and you're going to see a white, especially on the ends where the new growth is coming up in the central stalk. Very characteristic of this plant. You don't need to wipe that off or clean that off. It's completely edible, and it is a lot of the reason why this has a very high calcium content. We're going to look at the USDA actually has the new nutritional profile for this plant, and we can see here on the right hand side, when it goes to seed, you can actually collect those. It's going to be very similar to amaranth. It is in the amaranth family, and you can eat it in much the same way as amaranth by either as a porridge or as grinding into a gluten-free flour. So the leaves, you can eat them raw in salads, steam, saute, add them to soups, casseroles, add them to smoothies. You can juice them. The leaves can be dehydrated for later use as well, and they can also be blanched and frozen just like your typical spinach. Again, the seeds can be used just like amaranth. Typically, this plant is only about 1 to 3 feet. so it doesn't get to be extremely tall. Medicinally, you can use the leaves as a poultice, and you can use the poultice to help treat burns, reduce inflammation, or relieve itching. A cold herbal tea has been used by many groups, like Native Americans, to treat diarrhea. The leaves and seeds, they're a very good nutrient booster. They are very high in vitamins and minerals, and we're going to look at that in a little more detail. One note is it resembles Mexican tea, which is also known as epazote. So don't eat too much of, there's some warnings on eating too much epazote. It's more of a seasoning. It's a very strong tasting plant. It's very delicious. You can make a nice tea out of it, and it does serve as a medicinal herb, but it does have a uses medicinally, and maybe you don't want to consume too much as a salad green. But like I said, speak with your herbalist on that, and it is a strong tasting one, epazote, so you might not want to consume that much of it anyway. But it is delicious in small quantities and is used a lot in Mexican cuisine, like true Mexican cuisine. So lamb's quarter, we can see here, it's very high in calcium. I mean, very, very high in calcium. It has significant amounts of iron and magnesium. It's very high in manganese, and it's a very good source of phosphorus and potassium, and to a lesser degree of zinc. It's very good source of vitamin A, the equivalent being probably that it's in the form of beta carotene, which needs to be converted by the body, not the most efficient process for some people. And it does have large quantities of various B vitamins and vitamin C. Next up, we're going to talk about Carmen mallow. This is a plant that's not native, but you're going to find it in a lot of places. I wouldn't consider it very much an invasive. It doesn't seem to take over, though it is very well established around the area. This is in the mallow plant. Many of you may have heard of marshmallows or eaten them and roasted them over a campfire. Well, the marshmallow, we always say that is one word, really came from the marshmallow plant, and that is the mallow plant that grows in the marsh. This plant doesn't grow in the marsh. This will grow in much drier conditions, but it can be used in a similar fashion. Though the marshmallow plant probably is a little bit better at making the marshmallows. And we'll talk about what exactly those are and how those were made in a moment. So this is also known as buttonweed, cheese plant, or cheeseweed. And the reason it's called that is before it flowers, it has these little seed pods or wheels on them. And they look like little cheeses or cheese, like the wheels of cheese or little buttons. So just some pictures to see some of the variability in the leaves. They become a little more rounded, and depending at the stage of growth. And you can see the little cheeses on the right hand side. The leaves, they can be eaten as a salad green on sandwiches, steamed, sauteed, juiced, or blended. It's a very common green to eat in the Middle East as well. Saute it up with a little bit of garlic, onion, maybe a little bit of olive oil. It typically grows 1 to 3 feet. It doesn't really grow very tall. It's more of a spreader than something that's going to grow to be an erect plant. The leaves and the cheeses, you can add them to your soups and stews. They're going to give an okra-like thickening to those. The roots you can boil to make marshmallows or an egg meringue substitute. Now the true marshmallow plant is going to be a little bit better at that. It's a little higher mucilaginous content. The cheese and seeds you can boil with roots or alone as above. You're going to find these in disturbed sites. I don't want to call them waste places anymore. I'm going to have to go back and change these slides. Or like in yards, along sidewalks. The tea can be made from the roots, leaves, and or the cheeses. And this tea would be very soothing to the mouth, throat, stomach, and digestive tract due to the mucilage content. It's also been used historically for angina, coughs, and bronchitis. The roots and the leaves, it's typical to make a poultice out of those and using that to treat wounds and tumors. It's also been shown that this plant is strongly anti-inflammatory and does have mild astringent properties. Next up is stinging nettles and wood nettles. This is one of the most nutritious plants. Stinging nettles is very good for treating nutritional deficiencies and health conditions like dealing with the kidneys and urinary tract. There's a few species of the Urtica genus are from the Urtica genus that are around. So they're going to look very similar. There's a slender nettle, there's the stinging nettle, and then the closely related wood nettle, which is not in the same genus. All of these are in the nettle family, and typically they're going to flower from June through September. And these are native to this region of the eastern United States. These are just some different pictures. On the left, we're going to be having the stinging nettles, and on the right, we're going to be having the wood nettles. As you can see with the stinging nettles, it has opposite leaf arrangement, whereas on the wood nettles it's going to be alternate, but both of them have those characteristic little stinging hairs that are almost like hypodermic needles that are filled with the fluid that injects into your skin and causes that notorious sting that will persist for hours afterwards. And you'll see on the left, the stem of the stinging nettle is a little more upright growing, has a little more strength to it, if you want to consider it that way, whereas the wood nettle has a little bit more curvature typically. And as we'll see, as it's growing in a patch, this is where it's going to flower and going to seed. With both of these species, you're going to want to get the leaves and stems prior to flowering and seed production. The tender top leaves are best, and you can steam them, saute them, juice them, blend them in smoothies, add to eggs, casseroles, soups, stews, use them as a pot herb, use them as a broth. It's a very nutritious broth, especially if someone is sick or is suffering from nutritional deficiencies. They can drink a lot of this, and it's going to help rebuild their nutrient stores. But one thing, of course, we need to take into consideration is how do we avoid these stinging hairs? Well, whenever you're doing the above, it's by cooking and soaking them in water. It's going to remove the chemicals that cause the stinging. When you're breaking them up by juicing them or blending them in a smoothie, it's going to do the same thing as well. And you can also pick them raw and eat them if you roll them up in a ball, but that takes a little bit of time and effort, and of course you are still risking the fact that you could be stinging your fingers. It is not going to hurt you if you sting your fingers. It is not going to cause any long-term rash or damage. It's just going to cause some discomfort for a few hours. But medicinally, that plant has been used for that, specifically to flog oneself with nettles, especially if someone had joint pain or rheumatisms or some other form of arthritis. And it's called urtication. And it's been a folk remedy for who knows how long. So you could try that if you did have any joint pain. It also is a plant that has antibacterial properties and is being looked at as possible use in treatment for cancer. Medicinally also, fresh or dried leaves, the stems, young shoots, and flowers, either by making teas or by actually just consuming them by, in juicing or blending. It's going to help address nutritional deficiencies. It's going to help treat kidney, urinary, and gastrointestinal disorders. And it's going to help improve your immune function. And we definitely need that nowadays, I guess, and every day. And it's going to help purify the blood. The root, you can make the tincture out of it. It's going to be used, and it has been historically, to treat benign prostate hyperplasia and urinary issues. These plants typically get to be about 2 to 4 feet. That's with the stinging nettles. The wood nettles are going to be a little shorter than that. I've only seen those to be 2 feet at best. And these are perennials. Spiny leaved sow thistle. This is commonly called prickly sow thistle, rough milk thistle, spiny leaf sow thistle, sharp fringe sow thistle, a lot of common names. A note about calling it a milk thistle: this is not the same plant that you may have heard about with milk thistle seeds being very beneficial for supporting liver health. That is a completely different plant. That plant is not native to the United States either, but it is common in California because it has escaped from cultivation. Anyway, different plant, both are beneficial but for different reasons. This plant here and other plants in the Sonchus genus are very good, healthy, nutritious foods. This is a little less palatable than the other varieties we're going to cover. All of them, of course, would be in the same family, and that would be the Asteraceae family, commonly known as the aster, daisy, or sunflower family. Dandelions, burdocks, and chicory are all in this family, as are the wild lettuces that we're going to be covering just in a few. These sow thistles here are typically going to flower anywhere from June until October. And you'll notice that it has multiple flower heads. And a very common thing you'll note about the plants in the Sonchus genus is the way that their leaves clasp the stem when they curl. It's very good way that you can use to identify this plant and other members of this genus. The spiny sow thistle, while it is edible, it's more of a famine food because the leaves are very stiff. They're much more leathery than some of the other varieties in this genus, and you have to take the spines off. But if you can get those off and eat them when they're young and tender, or if you cook them like you would dandelion greens, you can get a very, palatable meal as well, especially in times of need. As you can see, the flowers on the sow thistles look very similar to the dandelion. And what we see here when it's going to seed, just how many flower heads actually are produced on one plant. Quite a few. Also, like the dandelions, when it goes to seed, it does produce a white seed ball, but much more dense than you would see, in my opinion, with a dandelion. Now, how would we use these sow thistles? And then also another reason on why they're called sow thistles. Hogs and pigs actually like to eat this. It's very good for them and they find it quite delicious. Also, hares, rabbits like to eat these plants as well. The parts we're mainly going to use as far as edible uses are going to be the young leaves and the shoots. When we're looking at sow thistles, we're typically going to see them be 1 to 5 feet. 2 to 3 is probably more about average. And as a non-native, where we're going to find them is more in disturbed sites, along fields, roadsides. We're not going to find them deep in the woods. We're not going to find them in an environment where we have mostly native species. It's going to be where they were able to come in and take root once the soil was disturbed, and yards and etc. like that. As stated, this is more of a famine food, but if you take the spines off, you can make a nutritious and palatable meal out of it. If you can get the young tender leaves, you can eat them like salad green, else cook them, steam them like you would dandelion greens. Don't overcook either of those. It's not the least amount that you actually can do to your food, and like with greens is typically better. You want to keep them fresh and vibrant. You don't want to overcook them and leach all the minerals out. You want to get as much medicine in you and as many vitamins and minerals in you as possible. Plus, when you cook and use a lot of heat, you're destroying all the vitamin C, or most of it. Medicinally, the roots have been used historically as a tea, more a decoction when we're dealing with roots, to treat asthma, bronchitis, coughs, and whooping cough. Here you may note that whooping cough, I spelled it incorrectly. It's actually spelled WHOOPING. And whooping cough is actually just the common name for pertussis. You may have heard of that. It's part of the DTaP vaccine, one of those that would be in there. And commonly get those together. And you can also use the leaves medicinally. You can use them as a poultice or as a wash, and that can help with swelling. The latex, that's when we speak of latex in a plant, we're talking about the juice or the sap, and that's been used, according to some literature that I've read, it to help treat severe eye inflammation. I think one would need to do more research on that to see how that would be used. And when we're identifying these plants, we'll notice that some of the sow thistles, they have a bluish green leaves, and of course they have spines on the margins and beneath. They have yellow flowers resembling dandelion, and the leaves are very spiny, and they curl at their bases and clasp a smooth stem. The leaves and stems, they have the milky sap when cut. It's a good way to identify it. And they have several flat top arrays of flower heads, and each flower head contains numerous ray flowers but no disc flowers. Now what we're looking at here is another member of the Sonchus genus, and it's field sow thistle, also known as perennial sow thistle, corn sow thistle, swine thistle, tree sow thistle, lots of different names that you may have heard, some you might not have. This is going to flower a little bit later, June through October. And as you see, the flowers look very similar to spiny sow thistle, except for you're going to find that this is a much softer leaves and has softer kind of hairs rather than you're going to find with the spiny, which is going to have very sharp thistles. Again, you're going to consume it in the same way. The size of this one is 1 to 4 feet, a little bit smaller than the spiny. This is much more palatable. And if you blanch or boil the leaves, you are going to help remove some of the bitter flavor. But again, bitter flavor and bitter herbs are good for us. It helps stimulate digestion, helps with liver support, and helps the gallbladder produce bile, which we need to properly digest our food so we can extract all the nutrients from it. This is considered an invasive noxious weed in some places, but so are dandelions. So just eat them, and then we will have a better world. We'll make the neighbors happy so they won't have to look at the dandelions, and you'll be more nutritionally balanced and you'll be healthier. This one is known as hair thistle or hair lettuce because rabbits love it more so than the spiny because of the spiny thistles. And again, you're going to find it in similar places as Sonchus asper. The leaves were used historically to calm nerves and have no information on how they were used, whether it was as a tea or whether it was part of a smoking blend. That would need a little more research. Identification is going to be very similar to the spiny sow thistle. This is going to have bluish green leaves, but they're going to have weaker spines than we're going to find with the spiny sow thistle. It has some hair on the bracts and the stalks, and the yellow flowers are going to resemble dandelion, of course. The leaves are simple, lanceolate, and they clasp the stem, we're going to find with the 3 members of this genus. The base of the leaf is going to surround the stem, and the leaves in the stem, of course, we have the milky sapwood cut and the same type of flowers. This is the smooth sow thistle. This is the most delicious to eat and the least amount that you have to actually work with to eat. Similar names, it's called hair thistle as well. And of course, what sow thistle, annual sow thistle, and non-native. According to sources, this flowers earlier from April to October. And these leaves, you can definitely see the bluish hue to them. And their flowers look a little more like chicory than I think they look more like dandelions. Of course, chicory has blue flowers, but just looking at the actual structure of the flower, you see it's nice and tender just by looking at it compared to the spiny sow thistle. It just looks a lot softer to the touch, and it is. It's a very nice plant to touch. And this is definitely the most palatable of the 3. And you're going to consume it in a similar fashion. It's a very nutritious plant, very high in minerals such as calcium, iron, phosphorus, high in vitamins, vitamin A, of course, the plant-based, likely in the form of the carotenoids like like beta carotene, vitamin B1, vitamin B2, B3, and vitamin C. You're going to find it in similar places as the spiny sow thistle and the field sow thistle. Disturbed sites, roadsides, fields, yards. Now, medicinally, this plant has been used to treat diarrhea and stimulate menstruation, and it was once thoughtful in treating opium addiction. And we're going to get more into that. When we're talking about the milky latex, especially of the wild lettuces, there is a compound in them, and that actually has sedating qualities, and it would make sense that this plant would also have similar characteristics. It could also be where they thought this was useful in treating opium addiction because they may have been getting it confused with the species of wild lettuce as well. So that's hard to say, but we'll definitely be talking more about the wild lettuces that they actually will call poor man's opium or opium lettuce, keeping in mind there are no lettuces that have any opiates in them. It's just the fact that there's a similarity that the properties and the compounds in the wild lettuces had sedating and calming effects, similar to what would be seen and opium that you would make from the poppy plant. Identification, we're going to have the bluish green hairless leaves on this one, whereas there were some hairs on the filled sow thistle and of course the spines on the spiny sow thistle. The yellow flowers are going to resemble dandelion, and the leaves are going to be simple, just the way that we had spoken about, and we're of course going to have the milky sap. And there's some debate depending on where it's located on whether this is an annual or biennial. Of course, it does have a common name as the annual sow thistle. So keep in mind there are sometimes some blurry lines with the rules in nature. Now we're going to talk about wild lettuces. And specifically we'll be talking about plants in the genus Lactica. There's a lot of plants that would be in this genuses. There's a wide variety of wild lettuces. Some are native, some are non-native. So we're going to talk about a little of both. All of them, of course, are in the same family. They would be in the Asteraceae family as the previous plants that we have discussed in this presentation. So, of course, edible uses, everybody's familiar with eating lettuce. Well, this is where lettuce came from. The lettuce that you get in the store, all of them have derived from the wild lettuces. Of course, they've been bred over the time to not have any of the milky sap in them, and that's been bred out, which means there goes the medicine. So many of our plants, so many of our fruits have had the medicines bred out of them, like watermelons. They're supposed to have seeds. I highly recommend getting watermelons that actually do have seeds. There's great benefit to that. Also, get grapes that have seeds. That's where the medicine is. Make sure you get the whole package. Anyway, back to this plant. The edible uses. The young leaves, you can eat them raw as a salad green or on sandwiches. You can cook them like you would spinach, reducing the bitterness with butter and vinegar, or mixing them with other milder greens. Or eating more bitter foods, developing more taste for bitter foods is probably the better thing. We need to kind of curb that sugar addiction that we have in a lot of America at this time. This is why we're having a lot of issues. Too much sugar is not healthy for the human body or any body. Anyway, the developing flower heads can also be consumed, especially before the stems unfold and the flowers bloom. You can add them to casseroles, and they're going to add a very unique bitter seasoning. I'm a big fan of eating lettuces. It grows in my yard, and I haven't planted lettuce in quite a time. I just eat the prickly lettuce that is growing for the last few years here. And where found, it's going to vary by the species. You can find it in fields, waste places along roadsides, clearing in woods, thickets, just general, any open clearing, and my yard. Medicinally, there are different varieties where in fact, all of them you can use the sap, you can apply it to the skin, it's going to treat warts. You can also use the sap, the milky latex, and dandelions to do the same thing. Now, wild lettuces contain a compound called lacticarium, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that is. Now, with identification, there's a lot of variability. There's some that grow to be a few feet high, and there's some that grow to be 10, 12 feet high. So keep that in mind, that you're going to see quite a wide range in the colors of the flowers, with some of them being yellow to being like a bright yellow like dandelion to being very pale. Some might have some reddish tinge. There's also some species that have blue flowers. Some are very deep, and some are going to be light, almost pale baby blue. Most are biennial, but that's not going to hold true for all of them. And of course, the sap is milky. So when you cut that, you're going to see that's sticky too. You can use it as a glue, not a very strong glue, but you can still use it as one regardless. And of course, in Latin, the term lactica means milky extract. Think about the word lactation. Again, there is where you can help remember the actual genus and what it means. So, talking about the milky fluid, the sap, secreted by several species of lettuce, and we're talking about after it's been dried and hardened and it turns brown. What that compound is going to be called is lacticarium. And lacticarium is known as lettuce opium, and it's why wild lettuce has been called poisonous lettuce. But wild lettuces do not contain any opium. Like opium, because that's excreted as white fluid as well, lacticarium can be reduced to a thick, smokable solid. Lacticarium has sedating properties, or sedative properties, sorry about that, and has been used historically as a hypnotic. That doesn't mean to hypnotize somebody, that's actually just a term for a sleeping aid. It also has analgesic properties, and it's used for pain killing. It possibly acts as a narcotic. They say some species have a greater tendency for that than others, and it also acts as an anticonvulsant. Which makes sense because people typically have convulsions. It's actually an overexcited state in the brain that causes that, and if something can calm that and sedate that, that would be logical why it would serve as that. Lacticarium has also been reported to promote a mild sensation of euphoria. Concentrations of lacticarium are low in young plants, but increase in older plants, occurring highest when in blooming period. Lacticarium also has antispasmodic, digestive, laxative, and diuretic properties. It decreases gastrointestinal inflammation and uterus contractions. This plant, especially with respect to this compound, was included in both the 1898 United States Pharmacopoeia and the 1911 British Pharmaceutical Codex. It was used in lozenges, tinctures, and serves as a sedative for irritable cough or as a mild hypnotic for insomnia. The standard definition of lacticarium in these codices required its production to be from Lactica virosa. There is some debate on which plant, which species has the highest amount, but again, that's just when they were standardizing medicine at the turn of the century, and when you're doing that, you need to have strict definitions. The leaves, the sap, of course, we're talking the latex here, and the seeds are used to make medicine. It's recognized that smaller quantities of lacticarium can be produced in a similar way from Lactica sativa, and that's garden lettuce, and also another variety, which is a variety of the Canada wild lettuce. And even that lettuce opium obtained from prickly lettuce, which is my favorite to eat, and some other species that were native to Europe and Asia, were of superior quality than the Lactica virosa. Meaning that you can kind of, if you're going to consume wild lettuces for medicinal or edible uses, of course consulting with a healthcare provider if you're choosing, experiment with some of the different varieties and to see what you prefer. What's interesting, we got a little bit from WebMD stating that it was used for whooping cough, asthma, urinary tract problems, coughs, trouble sleeping, insomnia, restlessness, excitability in children, painful menstrual periods, excessive sex drive in women, aka nymphomania, muscular or joint pains, poor circulation, swollen genitals in men, and as an opium substitute in cough preparations. The seed oil is used for hardening of the arteries, also known as arteriosclerosis, and as a substitute for wheat germ oil. Some people apply the latex directly to the skin to kill germs. Some people smoke wild lettuce for a recreational high, that is, a hallucinogenic effect. This is prickly lettuce. Grows very common around the eastern United States. It is non-native. It's also known as compass plant. There's another plant out there also known as compass plant, that's more commonly known as. It is not the same one. And even though it's called milk thistle, it's not to be confused with the actual milk thistle that is used for the seeds and helping with liver issues. Here are some interesting pictures. You'll see that the flowers are rather small. There's numerous flowers, and you may see some red splotching on these plants. Again, red doesn't necessarily mean poisonous, and an absence of red doesn't mean that something isn't poisonous. make sure you learn all the plants. And you can see when the seed balls are formed that they're very, the seeds are very concentrated inside, but you're not going to see the denseness as you would with the sow thistles or the dandelions. And as stated, you would definitely see the flower heads. There'll be numerous ones on this. And this prickly lettuce, which is, surprising, this is the closest wild relative, allegedly, of cultivated lettuce. So how we're going to use this, we can use the leaves, the developing flower heads. This plant's going to be typically 2 to 5 feet. The young leaves can be eaten raw as a salad green or on sandwiches, cooked like you would spinach or dandelion greens. And of course, you can just reduce the bitterness as stated with butter or some other fat of choice, and vinegar or mixing with other milder greens. The developing flower heads, again, before the stems unfold and the flowers bloom, you can add them to casseroles. I really like this plant. It's not thorny like you would find with a bull thistle or something that's going to have sharp spines. The prickles are very palatable, and like I said, I eat them even when the plant is grown very tall. I just pick the younger leaves off of it. The sap can be applied to the skin to treat warts, and of course this does contain the compound that we spoke about, the lacticarium. How you can identify this one from other ones, it's going to have small prickles on the lower part of the stem and the midrib of the leaves. The flowers are going to be pale yellow to yellow, and if you break off a leaf or cut the stem, you are going to see that milky bitter latex. You may hear some places that wild lettuces, you need to boil them in 2 changes of water to remove the opiates from it. No, you don't. There are no opiates in wild lettuce. You don't need to boil it. You don't boil your lettuce whenever you're buying it at the store. This is completely, if it's not a safe edible, then, I guess I've been doing something wrong, because I've been eating it for a few years on a regular basis, and it's completely fine. But of course, do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Next up, we have hairy lettuce, and this is endangered. It's listed as possibly extinct in Maryland, possibly. So if you do see it, make sure you just try to make sure that it stays. Of course, it's hairy. You don't really want to eat it. There's much more palatable ones out there, and this is not one that has a high amount of the lacticarium in it. So do make sure you do everything you can to make sure this stays, because we need to preserve our native species. Here's some other pictures of it. It's, again, even whenever it's in its early stages, you can see the notable hairs on it. And, we need to quit maybe growing grass in our yard and going back to the way things were, and actually letting nature establish itself. And if you're having a yard where dandelions and violets and clovers are growing, you have a free garden growing, and that you can go out and pick your own greens, and you don't have to worry about spending a lot of money on needless things like glyphosate. Don't kill the weeds, eat the weeds. The safe ones, of course. Again, we're not going to talk about medicinal uses. There are other ones better for medicine. It does resemble some of the other species, of course, because it's in the same genus. The lower stems and leaves are often hairy. Some stems are reddish. The flowers are often reddish yellow. And, of course, we're going to have that same milky bitter latex. There's no reason to consume this one. It is very, very, very rare. Canada wild lettuce. So you may see this one around, and this has a lot of names. They might call it Canada lettuce, tall lettuce, Florida blue lettuce, and a lot of variability. We're going to see another tall lettuce as well. June through October it could be flowering, and this is a native lettuce. And as you can see, this one here, it was growing a few miles from where I live, has just so many flowers on it. No prickles, though. Quite a beautiful one. And it has flowers growing out from different things, not just at the top, along the sides as well. Along where the seeds are coming out from the stem, there'll be flower heads. Of course, you can eat those developing flower heads, and this one has a lot of it, so you can pick off a few and still leave plenty for it to keep seeding on and keep proliferating. So the young leaves, they can be eaten raw as a salad green, same way, cook them like spinach or dandelion greens. Of course, you can eat those developing flower heads before they do that by just frying them up in some butter as well, maybe a little bit of garlic. Have them as a little side green to have as well. Thickets and clearings, roadsides. Along roadsides is where you're going to find this plant. Be careful picking things along the roadside. You don't want anything that's near where there's a lot of exhaust and runoff from the chemicals of cars, like, leaking oils and gasolines. The sap you can apply to your skin if you have any warts or any other skin eruptions. This plant, of course, contains that lacticarium. And how to identify this one from other ones. The flowers are going to be pale yellow to a dull orange. There's going to be a lot of variability in the leaves. Again, if you can just start recognizing things in genuses, like it's in a particular genus, it'll make it easier. And just noting the variability between the actually in just one particular species, and to expect that, but also just learning the other plants that are around you. And also make sure you definitely do consult your field guides and just really learn the plants and all the identifications. Don't look for something so hard that you want it to be something that it's not, and you get yourself in a situation of consuming a plant because of a misidentification. And the leaves are going to be alternate, and they're going to be up to 10 inches. The stems are going to be smooth, and they're sometimes dusted with white. And of course, we're going to have that milky, bitter latex. What we have next is a wild blue lettuce. Now, this is a super tall plant. The one that we're looking at in here on the photographs that I took are well over my head. I would say that point when I took them probably 10 feet tall. And this is called blue wood lettuce as well, or wild blue lettuce. It is native to the eastern United States and flowers from June to October. Sometimes hard for me to get pictures of the flowers because it is so incredibly tall. But we do have some. As you can see, that the flower structure is a little bit different than we see with some of the other lettuces. And this is going to have extremely large leaves as well, especially down at the base. And like the Canada wild lettuce, we're going to see that we have some flower heads that will be forming from along up and down the stem where the leaves are formed. And this one can get up to 13 feet. You're going to be able to consume it in similar ways. You would want to consume it when it's younger, because when it gets taller, all the good leaves are way at the top, and I'm not anywhere close to 13 feet, so I can't reach it. And all of the leaves at the bottom are a little bit old, they're a little big, and they're not as palatable. So this might be one better left, as it being native there, just to observe. And maybe going with the prickly lettuce, which is a non-native, and it's very prolific around. You're going to find it, and leave some of the native species alone because they are not as common. So of course, the sap, you can apply it to your skin to treat warts, same exact way. Don't want to repeat myself too much. And identification, the leaves are going to be deeply lobed, and you're not going to have prickles on it. You're going to have the flowers being whitish to a very light blue. And each flower is going to be about a half inch wide, and it's going to be loose clusters of these dandelion-like flowers. Again, not so much as some of the other plants. Some of the petals are a little more pointed than you're going to find in a dandelion. What we have here is woodland lettuce. I've never seen this yet. This is known as Florida lettuce or blue lettuce. It's also native. I'm hoping to find some of these photos that I was able to get off of the internet through Creative Commons. We're taking in Montgomery County, Maryland, outside Washington, D.C., so I'm hoping to be able to go there and look for this plant along I believe it's along the C&O Canal, which is the bike trail that goes from Cumberland, Maryland to Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And this plant, this variety of lettuce, flowers from August to October, and it just looks absolutely beautiful. Now, here's some photos that I was able to get from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. If you're interested in learning more about plants, it's a great resource. You can definitely check that out. They have just a lot of beautiful photographs and a lot of great information. So if you were to find this, which I would say you would be very fortunate, you could eat it, but you could also eat the other varieties that we've already talked about and leave this native species as something to take lots of beautiful pictures of. But if you were to, in a situation, eat it, you could eat it in a similar fashion that you would the prickly lettuce or the tall blue lettuce. Of course, the characteristics that's going to be able to differentiate these is that the flowers are going to be a much deeper blue than you're going to find with the tall lettuce. And of course, this is only going to get up to about 6.6 feet, not 13 feet. So you might see it be tall, but you're not going to see it being, twice the normal height of a human being. And it has deeply lobed toothed leaves all along the stem. And there is a variant that has an unlobed form as well. And that should say unlobed form, not unlobed from. So I'll need to correct that at some point. Not in this presentation. This presentation was already given, so it's going to stand the way that it is. Next up, we have bitter lettuce. This is a non-native. This is the one that was spoken about where this was actually in the codices. And this is also known as wild lettuce, opium lettuce, poisonous lettuce. It's not poisonous. Doesn't have opium. These are just some common names. But anyway, there's a really nice illustration here, and it does go over the different plant parts. And you have a lot of other names that it's also, my gosh, I do apologize. There are some serious typos in these last slides. But anyway, I will definitely make sure that I fix those at some point in the future. But I do want to get this posted on YouTube for people to become more familiar with the plants. We definitely need to take a look at these, considering we have a new world we're living in, it seems. Anyway, this plant here, it was non-native, and what's interesting is when you go to the USDA site, and you'll see it has a wide range worldwide, but it's only documented in a few places in the United States: California, Alabama, and Washington, D.C. Now, it's native to Great Britain and Europe, and obviously, which would be why it was in the British book on medicine at the turn of the century. And what is interesting, it was found near San Francisco, Alabama in one county, and Washington, D.C. Now, this one, there is no restrictions on this plant. It is not a controlled substance or anything like that. So you're free to grow it, and use it as one would see fit. It's very similar to prickly lettuce. And the difference is that bitter lettuce is going to be taller and stouter. It's going to grow up to 7 feet. And the leaves are going to be less divided, and they're going to be more spreading. The stems and leaves are more purple fleshed. So you may find it's going to be hard to necessarily tell the difference between that and prickly lettuce. But they do have similar uses, and there's some, evidence to suggest that the prickly lettuce might actually be superior to this plant anyway. But speaking about bitter lettuce, and of course this would likely apply to prickly lettuce as well, it's going to be a mild analgesic and have sedating effects on the body. It is non-native as discussed. Medicinal extracts made from the seeds, leaves, and the milky sap. You can make tinctures, powders, oils, and pills. Has been used for anxiety, breathing issues, poor sleep, and joint pain. The sap can be applied to the skin to treat warts, and it is said to have antibacterial properties when applied to the skin. The leaves are going to be bright green, which sprout from a green stem that is occasionally spotted purple. Where you're going to find this one is sometimes along riverbanks, which is not necessarily where you'll find prickly lettuce, along roadsides. Now, they are stating that this one has psychoactive properties, and it's sometimes used recreationally by people looking for a natural buzz. So you can take that for whatever it's worth to you. It's It's a biennial, and of course the sap has a bitter taste and allegedly has a noxious odor. Well, I've had a lot of prickly lettuce, it's a close relative, and I do not find it noxious, so I will be curious to know if I find the difference when I find this one, if I can tell the actual difference because of the odor. Anyway, another similar variety that you may encounter, this is going to be more in the Midwest, it's called prairie or biennial lettuce, Louisiana lettuce, western wild lettuce, and it hybridizes wildly with the Canadian lettuce or the Canada lettuce, and it's difficult to differentiate between the two species. You'll find a lot of that with a lot of plants that they do hybridize somewhat easily, and like stated, we're going to have Canada lettuce more often seen in the eastern U.S. and this in the Midwest and western states. This is growing 1 to 5 feet, and it's a biennial or short-lived perennial. It has a multi-branch inflorescence with many flower heads at the top of the stem, and each head is going to contain 20 to 50 yellow-ray florets, but no disc florets. So anyway, I thank you for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out to me at my website at www.iloveiodine.com. You can email me at iloveiodine@gmail.com. Also, we'll have more information. I apologize for some of the typos in here. It does make it more easy to see when you're going through a presentation. I will correct those in the future. But like I said, there is a PDF of this exact presentation that is on my website. I will try to change that and upload one with some corrections. But if you do get one of the original ones with some mild typos, I think you can determine what I meant by it and just go along with that and just maybe make your little corrections along the side. I do really appreciate your time. I really hope that this has been a benefit to you. If you would like to see the illustrations, the ones that are in black and white I got from the USDA database, great source for getting a lot of information about plants. And here's my contact information. And you can reach me at 240-284-0511. Please keep in mind that I would prefer that if you had a reason to reach me, email would be the preferred choice, or going through the contact form through my website. Anyway, I thank you very much.